Hello watercolor lovers, welcome to my YouTube channel Watercolor Impressions. This week we are going to paint a morning scene. This reference was taken outside my balcony while they are reconstructing the parking lot in my building. There is something about morning crisp lighting, makes me so excited, so I want to capture that lighting. And workers with the orange shirt also complement the scene even further. Before we get on to it, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. Feel free to download the drawing template in the description and make sure to keep it really simple. Even though there is no sky, I thought it would be nice to have a skyline, so I use a cobalt blue wash. And there is also a background building with a chimney. I kept just as a mere shape so that it doesn't read since it sits in the background. We can use any warm colors for the building. The color pop-up underneath the right bottom screen will also help you to understand what colors we are using in this painting. As you can see, we are focusing the light wash in the painting. If you start with watercolors, to make sure to start with light wash first, so we can build up pigments later. I'm throwing colors based on the reference. Being said that, I'm checking if the colors are on the cooler side or the warmer scale, instead of thinking in terms of colors. Now I'm using warm colors for the road, from the background to the midground, and make sure to connect it. In any painting, connecting shapes is really important since it gives a really nice transition. Now let's jump on to the grass bed, which is on the foreground. For the grass bed, I'm using Cadmium Yellow and Cobalt Turquoise, and I'm keeping it really weak, and it has to be really light as well. The pigment looks strong now, but as it dries out, it's gonna get lighter. Let's connect the midground and the foreground. For this, I'm using raw amber, burnt amber, and yellow ochre to get the warmth on the ground. I also mixed different colors on the foreground for a nice lead-in, and it's quite stronger. In the foreground, usually the pigments get stronger and vibrant. Here you can see we used a lot of dry brushing to get the white sparkle on the ground and getting some free details. I bet you can paint the details intentionally. That's a great thing about watercolors and dry brushing. I'm also keep building the pigment quite darker with less water on our brush. Let's keep building the pigment in the foreground. I'm using burnt amber and French Ultramarine blue, and I'm also throwing some NeutralTint in it. So now I'm jumping on to the building in the house in the foreground, so I'm using burnt amber. As it comes down, I'm going to use NeutralTint to get some gradient so that it doesn't look flat. And I'm also aware of the fence while I'm painting it too. And I'm also throwing some cat orange here and there to get some glow, because as it dries out, it's gonna give a glow in the house. Now let's connect the shape on the front part of the house. For the front part of the house, I'm using fresh ultramarine blue and a little bit of NeutralTint and burnt amber to have some color variations. I'm also being aware of the eyelets, which is on the front part of the house, as in the reference. Now let's jump on to the fence in the foreground, which connects to the midground as well. So I used the yellow ochre to create the warmth in the fences. And you can also see I also throw some raw amber in it as well. Now we are officially done with the first wash. So I'm going to start with the background. So for the shadows of the background, I'm using cobalt blue and a little bit of burnt amber in it to get the coolness in it. As it comes to the midground, I'm using a lot of dry brushing technique to get different variety of textures and edges in the trees. I'm mixing up a lot of different colors. As you can see, for the green, I'm using Cadmium Yellow and Cobalt Turquoise. And once I'm done with it, we can jump on to the background. For the background, I'm going to go super dark because that will create a beautiful contrast between the background to the midground and the foreground. Even though the background looks like a flat shape with a lot of coolness in it, as it dries out, the colors looks pleasing to the eyes. As soon as I'm done that, I'm jumping on to the front part of the house. I'm using NeutralTint to add some shadows to there, and I'm also adding some details for the cement poles, which is sitting on the midground. So as soon as I finish that, I'm jumping on to the fence's shadow. For the fence shadow, I'm using yellow ochre and French ultramarine blue. When I do this shadow, I want to make sure I do it in a quick and confident way, so there's no fuss about it. But as soon as I done the shadow on the fencing, I went to the windows on the house. So I'm using NeutralTint to add some windows on the house. And now I'm jumping on to the midground shadow. So for the midground shadow, as soon as we added that, it kind of looks like there's a pathway in it. Now let's go and do some figures. For the figures, he is wearing orange shirt, so I'm just adding that orange shirt using cadmium orange. And there's also a yellow part in the shirt, so I'm just leaving some white bits for it. So now I'm throwing some cadmium yellow on their shirts. For his pants, it doesn't matter what color you use, and make sure there is a lot of pigment consistency. That means a pure pigment takes in place. And the person in the background is the same thing. There's also 3 layers of figure in this painting, so the person in the foreground gets more details, and the person in the midground gets lesser details, and the person in the background gets no details. And for their body and for the head, I'm using burnt amber, a little bit of cadmium orange in it. And there's also a bucket in the foreground, so I wanted to add that because it also gives a beautiful shadow in the foreground and it creates a beautiful lead in as well. So now I'm mixing French ultramarine blue and Winsor violet to get some shadows from the midground to the foreground. So as soon as we started adding the shadows, the painting will start coming alive. And I'm also taking that shadow in the background as well. And I'm being aware of the shapes which is in front of the shadow. And there's also a white sign in the fence in the midground, so I'm just leaving some eyelets for it. And as you can see, as soon as we added it, you can see the lighting direction in our painting comes alive. And I'm using the same mix, and I'm going a little bit darker. Before bringing the shadows in the midground and the foreground, we can use clean water to get blurry edges in the foreground, and as well as on other part of the shadows, to get a variety of edges in our painting. Being said that, leave some gaps here and there while painting shadows to get some eyelets on the ground. Let's keep building the shadows in the midground. I'm also aware of the figures which are on the midground, so I'm just not going over it. So as it comes to the foreground, I'm trying to build the pigments darker. Let's keep building the shadows until I'm happy with it. So I'm mixing different colors on it. So I'm also using French ultramarine blue and a little bit of NeutralTint as it comes to the foreground. And I want the right side of my painting have a little bit darker tone, so that it gives a lot of good lead in for us. And I use the same technique for the house in the foreground. So I use clean water, and I'm using the same pigment consistency, paint some shadows on the house as well as on the fence as well. Let's keep building the shadows by throwing different colors and different pigment consistency for the shadows. So once we are done with it, now we can jump on to the shadow in the foreground. The worker in the foreground gets a darker shadow because since he is in the foreground, and the bucket also have a darker shadow as well which sits in the foreground. So I want to match the consistency in the foreground, so I add a little bit of strokes in the foreground to get that consistency to have a good lead in. So we are almost at the end of our painting journey. Now it's a matter of adding eyelets and some darker tones in our painting, and we're almost at the end of our painting. So the fences, at the bottom of the fences, there's a darker tone. I'm using burnt amber and a little bit of NeutralTint in it to get a darker pigment on it. And once I'm done with it, there's a lot of details on the ground. There's also a post sticking out on the foreground which connects to the midground as well. So I'm being aware of it, and I'm also being aware of my perspective as well. So I also have guidelines from our drawing template, so I'm adding that. And there's also directional lines which can also be added as a detail, and you can also see that in the reference as well. When you do this kind of finishing touches and details, you don't have to be 100% accurate to your reference. Your painting will tell you where to add details. Being said that, I'm adding the fences details. There is also a white sign which is attached to it. And I'm using NeutralTint to add this detail. I'll bring back the details using white paint. To bring back some highlights in your painting, you can use Chinese white or gouache. It's up to an artist's preference. I prefer gouache in certain instances so I can mix different colors with it to get some pigment consistency. I'm adding some highlights on the fence and the worker in the foreground and at the bucket, and there's also some highlights can be added at the worker at the back as well to bring some lighting in our painting. And as soon as I squinted my eyes, I also saw that there's this highlight in the front part of the house. I added that, and there's also a wire running in the house, so I'm also adding that using white paint as well. As I said earlier, the fence which is attached to the white sign, which is in a darker part, so I'm bringing back some highlights on that as well. And I'm just throwing highlights here and there, and that's it, folks. We're almost at our painting journey. Let me know what you learned from this video and what's your favorite color in this painting. If you have any other requests or subjects you want me to cover in watercolors, let me know in the comments or write me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching this tutorial. Please hit that subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And please do share with your friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.